Hello, it's a beautiful good afternoon and a warm welcome to The Verdict. Your host today, I am Afias Kaptula, standing in for Patrick Soko. However, the show goes on, and this afternoon, our topic of discussion, we're discussing about environmental issues, and the topic is Zambia on the right trajectory towards sustainable environmental management. In the show, to help us discuss this topic is environmentalist Mr. Robert Chimambo. A warm welcome to the program, Mr. Robert Chimambo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaptula, for having me. And indeed, you've forgotten we also have to talk about carbon trading.
Oh, sure.
What is carbon trading, which is a topical subject. We need to let our people understand what carbon trading is.
I think going forward we'll delve into
exactly.
Some of these issues. I think just starting, Mr. Chimambo, how do you describe environmental degradation throughout Zambia in the last 40 years?
I will usually, you give a perspective. You know, when you're thinking of in small terms, you can't see what is happening with the environment. And that's why Churchill said, the further back you can see, the further forward, so the better the story, you will know what is happening. Also, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, my election, it won't give you the big picture. Now, from that perspective, therefore, in Epano, Mr. Kaptula, I'm an urban child. I was born 76 years ago in a Broken Hill, the piece of ground where I was born. They were mining lead, zinc, and vanadium. They're disbowing the earth of lead, zinc, and vanadium. 1 kilometer away, mile in those days, Shmata, there was a Fibombero. They were smelting, burning, smelter, Shmata. I was center. You know what is center?
Yes,
the stuff that comes out when you're smelting. It was in my nostrils the very day I was born. 1 mile away, again, the chap called Seroy Werensky.
Yes.
He was a locomotive driver. He was burning 1 coal. It was called locomotive, just next by hospital, and then about coal was in my nostrils. These two are the epitome of industrialization. And that is 76 years ago. So I have a perspective now, as we are growing, Tambo Yanga, not Vinto Severe Ndamushe. Okay? And that is the perspective I want to bring into this. If you travel, I'm sure colleagues who are about my age, when just about the 70s, going backwards, the land was okay. All the streams, first time I remember I was going to Outward Bound School. The land is thick with the forest. All the rivers were flowing. When you come in from Lusaka, it all say up, flowing. I was in Petauke, my old people were in 65. You travel, you also the river is full of clean water. I've driven all the way to Northwest, all the way to Mongo, intact. Muja mumumbu amoja. Kanyama za kuchoka ku kafuwe kuja zibwela kumwamba kuja. This land was rich. In the last, let's say 50 years, and I say with a perspective, you can see the land is degrading. The land is going. Water, forest, what? Even in Kalulu, you won't find. Mr. Kapitol, just where we are here, you call this Lake Road. It is not Lake Road for, it is Kalikiliki Dam, it was a big lake. As a small boy, it we came kumbeza Somba, adventure. It was water here. All the water that comes from Kabulonga, it drains up to here, then goes underground and goes to join in Chalimbana. That's why you're finding at Yaloka, Chainda, there's water there. So now you have put people in harm's way. So all over the country, Eastern Province, the mountains, everything has been cut up. The rivers are drying in the last 40 years.
I think you have given us a grim picture right there.
Yes.
What do you think could have been the causes of this?
Now, basically, if you go back, you ask yourself, what were our grandparents doing to have kept the environment for millennia the way it was? That is the question. When I our grandparents, our forebearers, how did they manage the environment for it to have been in the state it is? And what have we not done to bring ourselves to where we are now, where everything is dry? That is the question. Okay? Now, for lack of time, what has happened is that around 19, especially 50, they came with their own management style. They call it management. Mm-hmm. You understand?
Yes.
Now, in our context, we didn't manage. You cannot manage the environment. Mukambati Christian country. Mm-hmm. When God created the Garden of Eden, and he put that gentleman, Adam, and the wife, did he tell them you are a manager of the garden? No. Management is a small, tiny laboratory concept that came out with this Ford One and those Mayo, the chaps who were trying to manage people like machines, you understand? It's a very wrong concept. You can't use it in God's creation. And that is what our people did. They managed it. They conceived, they didn't manage. You can't manage God's system. They were tenderers of the earth. Yeah? So they mimicked the way God made how things were. For instance, here, our sorry forebearers, Lusaka is a very wet place. They called it Manyika, Chinika. So they're talking about water. And it is very wet. So that is the key. To understand how did our people manage this? What have we done, this so-called management? You can't manage God's thing. We have to conserve it. Now, conservation implies, in our context, also a spiritual application of how God made this land. Now, there are various concepts which will guide us. The whole notion of Zambia environmental management is a fake. It's not working. And that is why Albert Einstein said what? Doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. It's a very definition of lunacy. China.
You have brought in the concept of conservation.
Exactly.
What could have happened under the conservation?
It hasn't worked.
Instead of management.
Yeah. You see, conservation is what we found. Our forebearers conserved nature. That's why the rivers were flowing. Some of the strategies or spiritual strategies they use, for instance, in the Tonga, the biome, the land that when they arrive here, there's a concept, a worldview called Malende. Now, all those places which are ecologically sensitive, for instance, Kuchoka Msinje, they use the Malende philosophical concept, meaning you don't touch. You live at nature's, and usually those will be where rivers are coming, and they've flown. If you go to West Eastern Province, the same thing, when our people do the Nyao dancing, that is a philosophical concept of protecting and conserving in a God's fashion. Of course, those things, but it was all for protection. In Western Province, all the Luyana Loze group and the Lundas people, the same thing, Mkanda and all this. All these, in fact, they call it Mishitu. Even in the plains there, in Western Province, our tradition was that there are places where, for instance, these beds used to come. In Senanga, the Litunga had preserved those, for those are beds. Yeah.
I think just moving forward, Mr. Chimambo, sorry for cutting you short. I think one of the concepts that has contributed to this breakdown of conservation or maybe the fate of management is urbanization. Just how has urbanization impacted in terms of environmental conservation and management? Yeah,
Zambia, as you know, has been a mining nation. We were colonized for these guys to start mining, but 2013. Now, you see, unlike these countries, Zanzibar, Kenya, they are farmers. Here, we are miners in the mining industry. So you have to bring people, concentrate them in one area, so that Wazuka, Mawa, and Kunchito. Now, those people have to eat. They have to be firewood. So you find that in all settlements where there are these mines, what happens? They have to go and cut down the trees. That's why you find now the copper belt is gone. Northwestern province is in a fast track to degrade. So that is the cause of urbanization. Now, you see, the problem also we had is that they didn't put in any mechanism. For instance, fire, Malaysia, Chad. They just brought people here. They didn't even provide for how are they going to use energy and so on. The next thing is they fall back on the local environment. Yes. Yeah. Now, as you know, we are now cutting firewood way into the game parks and all that. So the environment, the urbanization has been mismanaged completely. It is now a driver of deforestation, of degradation, and so on. That's the start. Part of the problem when you leave your traditional ways of managing. That's where urbanization is a driver, a major driver of what we are talking about.
All right, I think he well explained that. In case you're just joining us, you are watching The Verdict, and your host, I am Afya Kaptura. In the studio this afternoon, we are featuring Mr. Robert Chimambo, who is an environmentalist, and this afternoon our topic of discussion is Zambia on the right trajectory towards sustainable environmental management. Moving on, Mr. Chimambo, let us look at something that has come with urbanization is also industrial farming.
Yes. Yeah.
How has industrial farming contributed in terms of environmental management?
Yes. Now, you know, the way we farm ourselves is that you cut the trees, biomass. It's called agroecological farming or renewable agriculture. So you actually feed the soil. Eh? And that's how God works. You feed the soil. And now you come up with data farmers, mycorrhizals, funguses, and minyororo, vose vilimo. Niema farmers. Unikukonga mukayika vija mwaika, when you put those soil organic matter, those guys now break them up and do the chemistry and physics. Your role is to do what? To feed those. And that's what, if you go to South America, the indigenous people, those forests which you see in Amazon, they were farmed underneath, indigenous people, doing exactly what we do. The Bantu people, we did the same thing. Kwanza kumimawara kuchomero, tinapanga mikuti, I'm sure Kapitula, you heard of mikuti. You put in soil, and then you mount plant, beans, paja, milisi, jani, vonse, and even kumera bwino. Enter industrial agriculture, and that is the problem. I have to say this, unfortunately. We might want the Minister of Agriculture. I've been doing agriculture for 40 years, younger man on my farm. I started with fertilizer, my friend. Fertilizer, just like the kondi wambuye wanu wakaunda. Fertilizer is like a steroid. It was a mukamwa vima drugs. So when you put fertilizer in fresh ground, vimera, that's what happened to me. I put fertilizer, so steroid. But over time, like vijavama drugs, visila power, vaonong, because those are chemicals that are killing the farmers, the mycorrhizals, all the billions and billions in the soil when you put these chemicals. That Minister Mutolo, agriculture equals to fertilizer. No, please. It is killing. I'll tell you, I was Professor Chinene in 70. We had the SHEMP program, smallholder development program. We commissioned a study to check out the fertility of our soils. The study showed peak, plateau, and it is deep because the fertilizer now with these Musika guys, chemical glyphosate, mupailatu manja soil. So that is the industrial farming. Before I forget, it is mukushi. It is waste. Fly over there. The whole land is dead. And that, when they pour the these chemicals, when you pour glyphosate is a cancer causing. That's why Monsanto, which has gone to hide under Bayer. So the way Mutolo is pushing, that's not the way. That is even pushing us further into problems.
I think, Mr. Chimambo, I would like to guide that. Let's not mention the names of organizations and companies, as maybe we can just discuss the chemicals.
But they're the ones who are killing us. If you don't do it,
I think it's just best way. Okay. Yeah, we go that direction.
Yeah.
I think So for you,
So we have made the clear. The way our people farmed, the conservation farming, was sustainable. The land could feed us. But when we now introduce fertilizer, globally, the so-called green revolution all over the world, that is when our soils have died. If you remember, Jesus in the parable of the sower, if you grow food on a rock, Vizamera, he said no. Sand, no. He said you must grow it in rich, humic soils. That is what we must do. And for your own information, it's only here in Zambia. From 2019 to 2028, they've called it the decade of soils by United Nations. But here, because we've been captured by these chemical companies, we don't even hear about it. We are supposed to detox the soils, which industrial agriculture has done. It is there, it's a program. And strategies have been worked out. Countries have already adopted. Chemical fertilizer, industrial farming, it's not the way forward. So they are now detoxing their soils using what we call agroecological systems of farming, which our people had used.
I think from your explanation, Mr. Chimambo, it seems for you industrial agriculture, it's a no.
It's not for me, it's global. That's why, it's global. This thing is killing us. By the way, you know, when the food we are growing from there, it's systemic. It gets into the maize. This maize we are eating is full of glyphosate and so on. Why do you think there's exponential growth in cancer? It's that food we are eating. It's poison. Ask anybody. I mean, Kaputula, you know what's happening. These lion hungry things. You find the one that is 8 years. The weight is boxing there, you know. Say 27, I lost my wife on cancer because some fellow started to do flowers. 12 years. Poisoned my wife. So what I'm saying is that these things are killing people all over the world. It's not me saying it. You can read it all over the place. So the point therefore, what we are saying is that let's check. This environmental management, it's not working. And that is why, as Albert Einstein, you can't continue saying management. It's not working.
I think
so we need now to incorporate, like basically what I'm saying is that I'm not talking go to traditional system to achieve. Our people themselves, we have now got that concept of constituency fund within constituencies. That's where we can even talk of these catchment councils, water catchment, integrated water resources management.
I think this one also brings us to, you have mentioned in terms of a field system, we have the environmental police and institutions.
Yeah. You see,
their relevancy to the discourse.
Exactly the point I'm saying. These things have been working for so-called for 40 years now. We started with, it started with when they said the global conservation strategy. That's where we formed the Environmental Council of Zambia. And then, of course, later on we have got ZEMA. But they are all narrow, industrial, test tube, petri dish mindset. Scientism. This land has to be all global systems which are intact. Seascapes, landscapes, mountains, kumatandra, which are North Africa. They are all conserved under indigenous systems. 80% of them, all their biodiversity is intact. Even here, where systems that have preserved this. In Western Province, Northwestern, they've got these lagoons where Nsomba Zibarira. Our do that. So all do that. So all I'm now saying, this ZEMA, World Bank, the IMF, civil servants, let's step back. Where did we go wrong? We start to incorporate, and I hope the new ZEMA Lovejoy is listening. We go and get our incorporate our indigenous conservation, soil, forest, and river conservation system. That is where now we start building these things. Tibwerere, where we are, where we were, Nyao dancing. That what was the Nyao? What was the philosophy behind it? In the Bembaland, you know where they will bury the chiefs. Even in my Abalala Kumian, you could have from a kumfumo. That's where you bury it. And you know Trivatemi. So when you bury your chiefs there, the land becomes spiritual. You don't touch it. It is a conservation ethic which we must go back to. We are in trouble, I can tell you. I'm telling you, I'm 76 years. These things you only understand when you see them as long, decadal time frames, not 2 years, 3 years. We are in big trouble. This Zambia your children, if we don't do anything, won't find a Zambia that they can live in. So that is basically, let's step back, let's scrap this management and go back to conservation, like God said. Ecological conservation, which will involve our own cultures, preservation of animals. Manda ya mama, you even Chinese kabwera mambo fukulura manda yambuye vanhu ati development. What development? In our concept, and when we were developing the constitution, I was Chief Mumena. This land which you see does not belong to you, not even to the chief. It belongs to the people, our Gonamo, our people, generations, centuries of our people. It belongs to you, of course, Tiripo, but also to your children.
But to say it belongs to those who have slept there, it was just a means of preserving the land for those who
but you know, we are spiritual also.
Yes.
Museum yatu ita. I mean, we have seen people adwala mayesa manyereti mwampereka kwao kumuntu vampempelea muntu atabwa apola. So we are a spiritual people. And when I say spiritual, I'm not saying it in the religion thing. It is the global spirituality that, like we said, of Adam. In Australia, they've even stopped talking about farming. They've developed the old concept of tendering the earth. The indigenous people, the black people, that's what they did. They tendered the land, enhancing what God has already put there. That is where we need to do. Scrap this Zema. These are things that they are using to undermine us, to degrade our land. Where the Chinese or whoever it is that know, an elephant can live in Changa open pit. As in Saturn, Changa open pit, says a fly. It came from Zema management, but you can't manage nature. Nature, napangilatu mulungu. You have just to find your space and enhance, tender the way. That is where we need to do.
All right. You are watching The Verdict, and in the studio this afternoon we are joined by Mr. Robert Chimambo, who is helping us discuss the topic is Zambia on the right trajectory towards sustainable environmental management, and I am Afias Kaptula. Moving on, Mr. Chimambo, we have seen that in light of environmental degradation, we have seen that there has been some encouragement, and where also they are putting in form of incentives in line with carbon trading. Maybe just enlighten our viewers out there in terms of carbon trading, and also your thoughts on the same. Is this helping in terms of conserving the nature? Yes.
Before we go to carbon trading, you remember one of the laws we have, the water resources management. It said we must start managing water at sub-catchment level, where the people are. We need to revisit there, especially now when we have started the constituents funds. That is where we need to start, where the people are. Manzi mpamene ya choka, and then it grows into Zambezi. So the Water Act must be pushed, because this gentleman who was there, that whatever, you don't want names, but they were just busy talking about water resources as if it's that tax. Board tax. No, board tax was a small we put in to see if we can raise money for management, the so-called. And that is where, for instance, I don't know if you catch the whole issue of carbon tax.
We are getting
there. Yes. Okay. So you want us to talk about the carbon trading? Carbon tax.
Carbon trading for now.
Carbon trading. Maybe let's see. Carbon trading.
We are going to get to the tax.
Okay, to the tax. Okay. Now let's understand very well. It's as I said, even Vamulungu, if you understand where it's coming from. So carbon, or the best way to understand is, it's called greenhouse effect or global warming. Now, what it is that God has put a blanket on Earth, which is contains of carbon, methane. They call them greenhouse gases. Okay? Now, they are for a good purpose. The science tells that when the sun rays come in, you know, they are can be very disastrous. So they all come in onto the earth. But because he's put in that theme of gases, some of it, 70% of it, let's say, is reflected. Makumbi, back into Mlengalenga.
Yes.
So that we are left with something like 30%. But how does that 30% get caught? So the science tells that when the sun rays are coming, they come very strong, shortwave, yangena. But when they are reflected, it's like they bounce back. Their wavelength extends. So a lot of it, of course, 70% goes out. But because it has reduced power, it is reflected back by the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and all these others. That is what makes the whole globe livable. All this climate, the heat, you know, interchange of heat and, you know, what is this British scientist who said energy cannot be destroyed, but it converts into
other forms.
Into
yes.
other forms, exactly. So that is what was there. Now, they tell us that up until 1750, the Camnet blanket was about 200 parts per million, 250. But what does it do? Now, that's where we need to explain these things for us to understand in our context. How does it work? So what your grandmother would do at what
Please tell us.
So they would take chibafa. Na kaika masamba. You know, mankwala mitengo vicha. Na kutira mamanzi ya kupya maningi. Ise then wakuvuninkira. Ise wana kuvuningira akakwiriti. Mnamvera hapo kwiriti. Wana kujoga kujoni wana kubwesa tuma kwiriti.
I think that phenomenon came back in when there was COVID.
Everybody went back to kwiriti. Kufutikira kwa mene kucha. So as the heat yejimena motiramo, it dissolves you breathe in. So in that chan, there's a heat. That's global warming now, or the greenhouse effect. But not all heat is being held. A lot of it is coming. What kind of kachitenje? Because now assume that instead of kachitenje, mwekapo chiduve vivabwera or a heavy blanket, but tiramo a vicious maybe stepmother, but tiramo vimanzi moja. What is going to happen to you? Uzapia.
You can't survive. Yes.
This is what has happened. Kabulanga ikamena na ikapu 2,002 parts 252 per million. It was easy for heat to come out, come in.
Yes.
But now, about 1750, this industrialization starts. What do they do? Now, there's carbon which is natural, but in millions of years, 400 million years, there was a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. The Carboniferous period. Daniel the geological times and so that carbon is locked. It was energy, of course. Vimitengo, some crazy animals, you know those things that you see, dinosaurs and stuff. They all buried in there, leaving this land what it is. That is how now we evolved this thing. So what they have done now is that, what have we done from 1750? We went to dig, basically in Imandazija, and started to burn coal. What are we doing? Which was locked away, we are now burning it, and the end of Mulengalenga. So over the last 250 years, we have increased Kachitenge, which God had put it from 250 parts per million. As at May this year, it is now 424 parts per million. Maikapo chiduve. And the consequences of that is more heat. And what happens to heat? Energy. It converts in all sorts of things. Heavy, that's IPCC report, you know. It says intensive heat, intensive floods, intensive everything, heat waves. And the frequency of it happening. It's what you're seeing in Malawi, Mozambique, every week. So we don't know what will happen this year. IPCC reports, I mean, it's saying, even here, Lusaka, we can have 3 months of rain local with it. It will in the next 30 years. That's what they are predicting. So that is what has happened. We have increased greenhouse gases.
Now, how can carbon trading help in terms of alleviating these issues now?
That's exactly the point. So in 1992, they realized, we have done this. So they came up with a process to try and find a way to reduce emissions. That is what they call United Nations Climate Convention on Climate Change, the one which they've been negotiating from 1992. They came up with this Paris Convention. They've laid a framework on how to reduce emissions. Now, before that, in 1997, they came up, these neoliberal things. They said, no, we can actually do it quickly by trading carbon. As you know, the ones who have been burning and developing from that carbon which is causing problems, Britain, America, not you, not easy.
Africa
and also third world. We don't know zero. What is causing problems? They call it the science of causation. It is them. Yeah. So we agree that polluter pays, so you must pay. Yes. So now they came up carbon trading. They came up and said no, because of photosynthesis. You remember photosynthesis? When the sun comes in, these leaves they capture the energy, do the chemistry, complex chemistry, and they form those carbohydrates which they feed. You remember we talked about mycorrhizals and all that. So in that process, they are taking carbon from the atmosphere and sequestrating or locking it up in the ground. So now that is the science of it. That these guys now come up at we shall continue polluting, but we shall use your forest, my boy, to bring down the carbon. So they came up with what they called Kyoto Protocol, where they said clean development mechanism, all these words they use. But the idea was that they quickly came up with voluntary markets, voluntary carbon markets, trading air. And they said, no, this is, then it's an elaborate con job, basically. So they started now to trade. The idea is they say they didn't want to stop emissions. So they will say, no, we have calculated your forest have taken down so much. So kujatagulisa yamene yo inaboresa kuno carbon. So this is what's been going on. But now they told us in 1997 that as they trade carbon, carbon will do what? Will come down. They call it low-hanging fruit. As we do this, while we are waiting for the big Paris conference, chapter 6 to do. So, but what has happened? So they have been busy all over. Kwenda means where there are forests. So no, we shall give you droppings from the table. We shall give you money. We will reduce. Now, remember I said, at the start of there were 200, in fact, in 1997, when this thing starts, it's 297 parts per million. In 30 years, up to today now, of this carbon trading, they've made billions of money. But what has happened to carbon? Is it not supposed to have come down? Isn't it? That's the logic. No. As at May, it is now 424 parts per million. They made billions. In other words, this is a con job. It's not reducing emissions and will be most impacted now. And that's what you are seeing. The intensity frequency, because there's more heat now. But meaning they continue. And that is only trading. All those things are going to choke the environment. So more heat is being trapped.
In terms of carbon trading, this concept has been somewhat implemented in Zambia.
No, but
what do you think the country is benefiting
no,
from this?
that's what I'm saying. It's a con job. We said let's paya, carbon, the heat, isn't it? The more heat is being trapped. You remember I said more heat is one which is causing more rainy, more droughts, more heat waves, and we are a high level of dying, including more diseases. So we are not, it's not helping us.
I mean in terms of monetary terms, especially to the communities, those who are in those areas.
You missed the point.
You are an environmentalist yourself.
No.
Is there any monetary gains that those people are
They
getting?
made billions of hours. Nothing is coming to the communities. But still more, Kaputula. This is a placebo. You know, amuna mani, vadokota vakudala vajama quack doctors. Vakula sanyereti ya manzi. But they are telling you, you know what do ala vamene vikali hivi. You are very bueno, just kansakula samanzi. This is what carbon trading is. It's a feel good when we are doing something about it. But in reality, it is not curing, as the lawyers will say, it is not curing the problem for which it was, which is to reduce emissions. It is not. And if they keep pumping water, you are suffering from STD, uzafa, because it will go up. So this is what's happening. They are making money, Yambiri, yes, but is it going to save us? When Karikiriki floods, when we have 3 months of rain, because we have more heat, 400 parts per million. By the way, they are saying this is the first time in millions of years, 3 million or so, that the Earth carbon has reached that level. We are in uncharted territory. We can, here in Lusaka, I can get 3 months of rain. In Rwanda, the carbon feature. The reporter saying we can have 3 months of rain dropping in 15 days. The whole land is flooded. It's happening all over the place. So what is the point? We are shooting ourselves in the foot. Mrs. Compound, you know which flooded last year?
Kamwana South.
Kamwana South, go there. The water is still very table. Then we have 10 days of rain. What will happen? Yours manyumba ya jaza, it will be in water everywhere. So we say carbon, what is it going to help you carbon trading? Of course, they are going to make more money, but not you. You are going to die. So this carbon trading is a placebo. But in Dama, yes, you get money, yeah. But you get money, what will you do? You still die. So our issue is to find money where we can do local level mitigation. You begin to conserve our land. We need to find means or ways of adaptation. We have an adaptation plan, which National Action on Adaptation. It's a document we developed in 2007. It's been thrown away. We are just busy now talking about national determined contribution. And you know what they've said? I was in Kenya. That national determined contribution, you know what they're saying? Instead of them passing drama to adapt because they caused the problem, they are now saying in chapter 6 of that article 6 that imomzagulisa carbon. Kuri wewe tundarama tumena wazo mpasano tu. Ntumena mzambo chita mitigation. Or an adaptation. You fund your own adaptation. But that's completely against the philosophy, the understanding of UNFCCC. It is them who are supposed to fund this. But they've turned down that's the carbon trading. It is a con job.
Interesting perspectives right there, Mr. Chimambo. In case you're just joining us, this is The Verdict, and in the studio this afternoon we are joined by Mr. Chimambo, who is an environmentalist. As we are going in the dying minutes of the program, you have mentioned that on the local scene, in fact, we also touched in terms of the international scene, in terms of measures that have been put in place in terms of policy. Let's zero in into the Kyoto Protocol. Maybe you can also touch into others a bit as we explain this one, just in a few words. Do you think the Kyoto Protocol has served its purpose in terms of reducing greenhouse emissions?
Yeah, it is still going on. But the Kyoto Protocol, as I said, why I mentioned is it is which gave birth to this voluntary trading of carbon. It has failed completely. Exactly the point I say. When it started, emissions were parts per million was 200 and 258. It's 400 now. In other words, it's a total failure in the context of reducing emissions. So that's a dead letter. Now, they've done all these other things. The point, key for us, we are on our own. You know, the setup, we were in Cancun, and when you have heard of the Green Climate Fund, that Green Climate Fund was international civil society. We fought that we can't have the World Bank, which has been funding the problems, the same mindset that caused the problem. You can't have it to solve the problem. Let's find something else. That is when they pushed for the Green Climate Change. But these guys are smart, you know. So they said, okay, no, we allow you Green Climate Fund. And we said it must adaptation, fund equal adaptation and mitigation, you know. But what the transitional period is, no, because you know nobody else knows how to form a bank of this kind. World Bank will do it. What has World Bank done? The innards of the Green Climate Fund is World Bank. So it's useless for our purpose. Now what we said at that meeting is, but this thing want to be a problem. Why don't we find a local level at home means and ways of raise money? Because climate change is already in the house. The lion is eating our children. How do we defend ourselves? That globally, civil society, let's go home. One of the things which we can do is create a carbon tax. Now, carbon, vimamotoka vibora ku Japan. They are using it as a green development mechanism under Kyoto to dump those things here. Because vimamotoka vijavita emit maningi ma carbon. Kuja kwao the registers, no, Japan has no, it has reduced its emissions. It hasn't reduced, it has exported to Zambia and Africa. So that's why I'm putting that carbon tax. In fact, for me, would have even further, we should be charging these Japanese for dumping their end-of-life cars, which are emitting. If you are in Nairobi, you feel terrible. So that is when we introduced the civil society. Let's go and say that here we are ZCCN, Zambia Climate Change Network. Namugara was the Honorable Namugara. We set up this. Tizichosa, as you do your tax, Mwachosako carbon tax. Now, what shall we use it for? We had set up those laws. Zema has to have a fund. Water Act had to have a fund. Forest, same. I think in our town and country, we had these funds, but these funds were Madonna, you know these donor. I come to my token, but to Manamuntu wao, you know, like Zema, they sent some white boy. After that, they cut and run. So we said, is in the Ramazatris, the carbon, to help money is there. Now we have even a constituency fund. Let's get that money. The president must create a fund, presidential fund for environmental adaptation and conservation. Yeah? And this money, constituency fund, also go there. It constitutes how to conserve the environment and the natural resources, rivers, subcatchment, Tonsoma catchment, which we wanted to do for Chalimbana, headwaters, Kaja Forest. Reharvest, put weirs and dams, so that place is called a green lake. Because it's all water, which then is transpired. But it's all water, little streams. When in every constituency, you map it out. This is long term, and the carbon tax is long term. We are on our own. Let's not look at these people. Let's begin to think original in the villages, in our people. So that is now the carbon tax we now start to use to do studies. Yamedita Kamba, Malende concept, the Nyao concept. How do we broaden it? How do we put it into our policy for long-term conservation of our land for your generations? The Constitution is very clear. It says protecting or conserving the land for current and future generation. Those are the policies we need. Let that money, carbon tax, be released. President create a tax. We told then Honorable Mugara, when she went there, I don't know, she came back and said, yeah, he's in Damazavuta. He knows Kangena, which control 99, it disappears. So that is the way forward. Mr. Kapitula.
All right. I think we touched on the Water Act. I think now in the dying minutes, I thought we can a bit elaborate on this issue.
Yes.
Just the three
yes.
on the Water Act. You did mention that there is a need that this act is looked into.
The way in the olden days, the Bazungus, they will have water, forest, and I think agriculture in one ministry. But when you bring these reductionist, atomization mindset, because it's a way holistic. God is complexity. Me, I told you I'm a peasant farmer. I work with the mind of God. Now, what it is that when the laws was integrate water resources management, integrating everything which helps to local. So your soil is number one. You need to look after your soil. To look after your soil, you need water. To need your water, you need vegetation, then biodiversity. Okay, that is a concept of sub-catchment council. Small rivers to streams to begin to manage them. Because tuje tukagwira manzi yamba yapaka mpaka yapanga Zambezi. You understand? Yes. So that is what I'm saying, that we need to revisit the Water Act, especially implementing those sub-catchment councils. ZEMA, in my view, cannot work. We start with water, with forest. Then ZEMA is now so-called conservation and overall. But let's go down where the water is, where the forest is.
I think on this, don't you think the water resources management is doing something?
Again, you see, you are talking management. You can't manage. You conserve. So forest, soil, forest, and biodiversity. That's the starting point. You can't manage. What you do is you enhance them. Management is a World Bank laboratory concept, and that is what is destroying our land. You can't manage. Adam, I've told you, in the Garden of Eden, when I was a manager, no, he was part of the environment, and that's how we are. We have been always part of the environment. That's why you find in our cultures, what gland are you supposed to njovu, a bedi, fishy, mitengo, mbeva, nguruve. We were part of the environment. That's how we conceptualized the world view, the philosophy of our Bantu people. We are part of it. We are not outside. These chaps are the ones who have come to remove us. You are a part of the environment. That is the philosophy we must go back to.
All right. I think you did touch on, you did mention Dr. Stumbeko Msokotwane in a minute.
What I'm saying to my brother is that
there's a budget before you come in. There's a budget this Friday. From your angle of interest as an environmentalist, just in a minute or two, what do you want to see?
Get that carbon tax money, create a presidential fund, which we shall use now to fund a conservation at constituency level. Those slalom indunas were looking for lagoons where fish was breeding. That system is there. These are traditional people who looked after where the fish was breeding. Let's go back there and help with this carbon tax money to revamp. In Tongaland, all the people, Kafue, all the animals used to transhumans. Kafue before they put that in Kambala and all that. Mukudies, transhumans. Like a dry season. Zayenda kucha, sikudia moja. After Yabuela Mvula, they go back to the upland. Then the land is free. It has been relieved, so the animals can eat. So there was no degradation. Now you have all the animals in the upland. So that should also find a way of. So in Western province, it still happens. In the plains. But we should enhance that so that the Mushitos, the upperland, is reserved. It only comes back when there's rain. So that is what I'm talking about, the conservation ethic of this land managed.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chimambo, we have come to the end of the program. I want to say thank you very much for making an appearance on the show. I think we into the management of the environment.
Management.
I rather should remove
protection, maybe.
Maybe we should try to say protection.
Yeah.
Of the environment.
Yes. Basically, what I'm saying, you remember what I said, that all over the world, the areas where it's seascapes, mountainscapes, which are still intact, they are run by the Malende philosophical concept, where God is in front. I'm not saying God in the narrow sense. I'm speaking it's broad, global, all indigenous people, all societies, they recognize first and foremost the spiritual of God. I've been in Peru